ونعوذ بالله من شرور أنفسنا ومن سيئات أعمالنا من يهده الله فلا مضل له ومن يضلل فلا هادي له وأشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له وأشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله صلى الله عليه وعلى آله وأصحابه ومن تبعهم بإحسان إلى يوم الدين أما بعد. So today, inshallah, we'll be continuing our trying what we had started a few nights back, where we're discussing the book which is named or titled Umdatu Saalik. And this is the book that has been authored by Ibn Naqib al-Misri, one of the ulama of the Shafi'iyah, who died 769. So he put together this book that discusses matters regarding ahkam al-shari'iyah based upon the madhab of Imam Shafi'i alayhi rahmatullah ta'ala. And we have been discussing concerning what he mentioned in his kitab as-Siyam. So as a reminder to ourselves, and also a part of the preparation for Ramadan, that is having the awareness and the reminder of the ahkam that relates to Ramadan. So we have followed through what he have mentioned in most of his points, and tonight inshallah ta'ala, that yesterday that we have covered most of the points regarding Ramadan. We'll cover most of the points regarding Ramadan, and he had discussed yesterday regarding of those things that nullify Siyam, of those things that are said to be mandub, those things that are encouraged for one to do while fasting, and also he mentioned things that are said to be disliked, so things that are also makruh, disliked to be done, or things that mentioned at-tark, things that we should avoid while fasting. So he mentioned some things regarding that we should avoid while fasting, and today that the next section that he discusses, that he mentioned things regarding as-sawm, yani at-tatawwu, so matters regarding, as he mentioned in your artist title concerning fadl ayyam allati yandab as-sawmuha, that days that are it is encouraged for one to fast those days. So of the discussion regarding Ramadan is that the ulama will also include things after discussing Siyam, by way of which is the rule regarding what is wajib and things to be done. Then they'll also include matters pertaining to those other days outside Ramadan that one is allowed to fast, those extra days or those days outside of Ramadan that one is allowed to fast. So in general, that fasting outside of Ramadan, that they refer to as sawm at-tatawwu, so as-siyam at-tatawwu, so the person doing those non-compulsory, those voluntary fasting. So also they have ahkam that one should follow. So you find that the ahkam regarding them are somewhat similar to that of fasting Ramadan. So the general ahkam of siyam applies to sawm, which is said to be fard, compulsory, or those that are said to be non-compulsory, that are said to be voluntary. You have a slight difference in some, but the general rule is the same. So of those ones, they'll kind of somewhat explain of those ones that by way of the sunnah or by way of text, that we're encouraged to fast certain days. So to highlight and to mention the ahkam regarding those particular days that we are more encouraged to fast those days. So they'll discuss in as-sawm at-tatawwu. So overall, that they'll mention that as-sawm at-tatawwu, that what is meant by this are sawm and nafl, that I mentioned that what is meant by this, that as the ulama mentioned, they said concerning wa kullu siyam ghayru mafrud, that is every siyam that is not said to be compulsory. So as-sawm at-tatawwu or sawm an-nafl, that is every siyam that is not taken to be compulsory. So they mentioned that will include anything that goes outside of Ramadan. So fasting Ramadan would be excluded in this. Also qada for Ramadan, the person who's making up for Ramadan, that is considered to be also to be compulsory. So it is not tatawwa, and also which is kafara. So a person making up sawm kafara, that's said to be wajib, and also another. So or a person take a vow that they wish to fast a particular day. So those are the ones that are said to be wajib. So wajib would either take the place of Ramadan, or a person making up for Ramadan, or a person making kafara either for Ramadan, and also another, the person have somewhat stipulate or make a vow that they intend to fast a particular. So those are the ones that are said to be wajib. Outside this is said to be tatawwa or nafl. It is said to, is considered to be a voluntary fast. So they mentioned that is voluntary fast. Yafala al-Muslim, where a Muslim will perform this fast, taqarraban ila Allah, doing so, getting close to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, wa ziyada fil al-hasanat, and that the person want to increase in his hasanat. So the person want to increase in his good deeds. So this would be of a sawm at-tatawwu, so doing something which is additional to that which is compulsory, where the person intent is that he wants to carry out this act, one according to the sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ in matters of tatawwa. So the person has to comply with the sunnah and with what is recognized in the Sharia, and also the person doing it to get close to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and also to increase in his hasanat, So in the discussion, we won't stick fully to what the author mentioned. We're just going to somewhat mention tatawwa in general, the more common ones that are known. So of this also the ulama mentioned that at-tatawwa, as-sawm, at-tatawwa, that they either can be muqayyid, those ones that are restricted, or mutlaqa, or are those that are general. So al-muqayyid would be those ones that there's an asbab, there's a reason behind fasting this. So we have some form of text that is encouraging us to fast this particular fast. So it is classed as muqayyid. So it is restricted based upon text to fast certain days or for certain reasons. And also you have as-sawm al-mutlaqa, those ones that are said to be general, where there's no reason behind fasting it. There's no text to just for encouraging for a person to fast this particular fast. So with that, they mentioned that as for those ones that are said to be muqayyid, that before we go in, so we'll be discussing those ones, primarily the one that we have some form of text that we are encouraged to fast, those voluntary fasts. We'll be more discussing of those ones. But in discussing this, the ulama mentioned that as a form of introduction to this topic of Siyam, that they'll mention regarding concerning that, as we had, the author have somewhat mentioned, that as-sawm, regarding concern that we discussed concern al-qada with those ones we discussed yesterday. But as for those ones are said to be as-sawm at-tatawwa, so those ones that are said to be as-sawm tatawwa, that of those ones that they mentioned, that they state regarding concerning that they'll usually start, or in this case, we just start with what is mentioned here, that of those ones that fall under this, that they mention the person fasting, as they say, regarding concerning that manhi'an al-Arafah, they mention Sawm Yom Arafah. So of those ones that are included, Sawm Yom Arafah, they mention that the evidence for this, they show that regarding concern the evidence for this, that the hadith of Abi Qatada al-Ansari radiyallahu anhu, and Rasulullah alayhi salam su'ila an Sawm Yom Arafah. So the Prophet alayhi salam was asked regarding fasting Yom Arafah. فقال يكفر السنة الماضية والباقية. So in this they mentioned, the Prophet alayhi salam, he mentioned of those fasts that are somewhat encouraged, highly encouraged, is fasting Yom al-Arafah, Yom Arafah. So they mentioned that the reason, and of the reason for this he mentioned يكفر السنة الماضية, that it expiates the sin of the previous year, والباقية, and the year coming. So from this they state concerned that this of those fasts that are recommended to be done because of the reward that is involved. The ulama mentioned regarding this fast that Yom Arafah, that will be the 9th of Dhul Hijjah. Arafah, the 9th of Dhul Hijjah. So they mentioned that as for fasting this fasting, that of the benefit, it expiates of the sins. So mean the previous and the coming year, that by way of, they discuss the sins that are expiated in this fast. Is it major sins or minor sins? So is it major sins, or this expiation of sin for fasting this day, does it apply only for minor sin? So you have that discussion between the ulama on this matter. So the majority of the ulama, they mentioned that as for what is mentioned regarding yukaffir as sana al-madhiya, is in relation to minor sins. As for major sin, then I mentioned that major sin required a person that he has to make tawbah with the condition attached to it. What these sins, that the person does have to have a specific intention that they'll automatically be expiated by the person fasting this day, by the person fasting of this day. So fasting Yom al-Arafah, they mention overall is something which is mustahab, is encouraged to be done, and it's the day which is Tasa', it's the 9th day of Dhul Hijjah. So it's the 9th day of Dhul Hijjah. So especially concerning those people who did not participate in a Hajj, for those people that did not participate in Hajj. And I mentioned in the ijma' between ulama that fasting this day is considered to be afdal siyam at-tatawwa. So they mentioned that of the ulama, that they state that of the best, the more recommended, or the most recommended of the fast of the tawwa, that they mention Sawm al-Arafah, Sawm Yom Arafah. Then the next that they mention regarding of those siyam, that the same hadith of Abi Qatada that also it includes concerning فَسُهِلَ and Sawm Yom Ashura. So the next question that they asked in the same hadith, where the question he asked another question, which is Sawm Yom Ashura. So they mentioned that the Prophet ﷺ respond by saying قال يكفر السنة الماضية, that he was asked regarding why or what of the reward of fasting of Yom Ashura. Then the Prophet ﷺ respond by mention يكفر السنة الماضية, that it expiates the sin of the past year. It expiates the sin of the past year. So the ulama, they discuss concerning with this hadith, that a discussion one, that An-Nawawi and others have mentioned in his explanation of Sahih Muslim, as he mentioned, اتفق العلماء على أن الصوم عاشوراء سنة. So he stated that the ulama, they are in agreement, so the scholars are in agreement that fasting Yom Ashura, that is said to be a sunnah. It is something which is mustahab, it's not something which is wajib, so it's of those recommended days to fast. The khilaf between the ulama on this topic, they discuss concerning identifying which day is Yom Ashura. So they're identifying or which day is said to be Yom Ashura. So you have that discussion between the ulama, that of Jumhur of the ulama of the Salaf wal Khalaf, that Ashura, it is Yom Ashir min Muharram. So it is the 10th day of the month of Muharram. It's the 10th day of the month of Muharram. Of the ulama who mentioned Qil Yom At-Tasi'. Of the ulama who mentioned that Ashura, it is the 9th day of the month of Muharram, but the qawl of Jumhur of the ulama is that qawl which is more correct. The qawl of Jumhur of the ulama, then that's the qawl that is the correct view regarding that matter. Then also with this hadith of fasting Yom Ashura, that is the 10th of the month of Muharram, then of those things that is also mentioned or included in this discussion, that another hadith that is in Sahih Muslim, where the Prophet ﷺ, that he states regarding concerns Metakana, that qala inna sama Yom Ashura, that when the Prophet ﷺ, that he fast Yom Ashura, wa amara bi siyami, qal, then he recommend the people that they should follow, qalu ya Rasulullah innahu yawm tu'azzam al-Yahud, that it's a day that that the Yahud wa Nasara, that they hold this day in importance, they give some importance to this particular day. فقال, then the Prophet ﷺ قال عليه الصلاة والسلام إذا كان عام المقبل, if it is for the next coming year, inshallah, if Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wish, sumna yom at-tasi'. So the Prophet ﷺ, when he was told regarding Yom Ashura, is a day that the Jew and the Christian give it some importance. Then the Prophet ﷺ, when then he mentioned that, then he respond by saying this, فَإِذَا كَانَ عَامُ مُقْبِلٍ, if it's the next coming year, inshallah, if Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wishes, sumna al-yawma at-tasi', then we should fast also with the 10th, also the 9th. That we should fast with the 10th, also the 9th. And we mentioned a hadith in the Sahih Muslim. Then I mentioned the Prophet ﷺ, so he passed away before that coming year. He died before he was able to carry out this act. He died before this. So they mentioned that from this particular hadith, it shows that also what is encouraged and also of the sunnah, that if the person was to include with the 10th, also the 9th. So fast, then the 9th and also the 10th. And the reason behind this is to be different from the Yahud and Nasara, be different from the Jew and the Christians. So they mention al-jam bin at-tasi' wal-ashir, that what is more preferred is for the person to combine between the 9th and the 10th of Muharram, the 9th and the 10th of Muharram. And they mentioned Mukhalif al-Yahud and also others. And that's the view taken by Jumhur of the ulama, amongst them Imam Shafi, Ahmed, Ishaq and others. Then a next discussion regarding that matter they discuss, Hal Yusum al-Yasam al-Tasi', that the person fasts the 10th, if the person was unable to, is allowed for a person to fast the day after. So we've discussed about fasting the day before, which is the 9th, but also is allowed for a person to fast the day after the 10th. So he fasts the 10th and the 11th. So whatever reason the person was unable to fast the 9th, is then the person allowed to fast the 10th and the 11th. On this matter, there's a hadith in the Ahmed in his Musnad, where he mentioned the hadith that it states, and Ibn Abi Layla and Dawood ibn Ali and Abihi and Jaddihi ibn Abbas anhu قال رسول الله عليه الصلاة والسلام Sumu Yom Ashura. With the Prophet ﷺ, he mentioned Sumu Yom Ashura, that you should fast Yom Ashura. وَخَالِفُوا فِيهِ الْيَهُودِ, that also you should be indifferent from the Yahud. Sumu qablahu Yom, so fast a day before, which is would be the 9th, or ba'dahu Yom, or after by a day. So in this hadith that we mentioned here, that it, of Ibn Abbas, where the Prophet ﷺ mentioned Sumu Ashura, or Sum Yom Ashura, fast, you should all fast the day of the 10th. They mention Khalifu fihi al-Yahud, be indifferent from the Yahud. They mention what to be done, Sumu qablahu Yom, so fast with the 10th, the 9th. Then also I mention, and the day or the day after. The day after the 10th would be the 11th. So the hadith, some of the ulama mentioned that the person can either do the day before or the day after, based upon this particular hadith. But the ulama of hadith I've mentioned regarding this hadith is da'if. That I mentioned that this hadith is da'if, and the reason behind that I mentioned in this isnad of this hadith, and person mentioned that concern that min Tariq ibn Abi Layla, that was Muhammad ibn Abdul Rahman ibn Abi Layla, that he said to be a person sailhif. And also Dawood ibn Ali, also da'if. So you have two narrators in this isnad that are considered to be of those that are said to be weak narrators. Ibn Abi Layla and also Dawood ibn Ali. Both are said to be narrators or da'if. So based upon this, the hadith is said to be weak. And so by this, then this the ulama mentioned that so what is more preferred to be done, that a person go with the hadith the authentic, the one which is in the Sahih Muslim, that you fast the day before, which hadith somewhat coincide with that regarding Sumu qablahu Yom. But as for fasting the day after, the ulama mentioned there's no clear evidence for this, where there's no authentic hadith regarding fasting the day after, fasting the day after. So some of the ulama have clarified that regarding Yom Ashura, that either the person fasts Ashura by itself, the 10th by itself, that's acceptable. Or second, what is best, that the person fasts the day before, which is the 9th and the 10th, then that is based upon the hadith of the Prophet ﷺ to be different from the Yahud. And as for the person, as the other option is to fast the 10th and the 11th. But as for the 11th, there's no clear hadith, there's no authentic hadith regarding this matter. So the person go back to the two first cases, go back to the first two cases of fasting either Ashura by itself, or if the person able, which is more preferred, that he fasts the day before, as for the day after, then the hadith is da'if. The hadith is da'if. And because an act of ibadah, it requires some sound evidence, as these matters are tawqifiyah, it goes back to evidence. Then you have another discussion regarding Yom Ashura, which will be maybe the final that we'll mention regarding Ashura, Yom Ashura. The ulama discussed concern was Ashura initially before Ramadan, fard or mustahab. So before Ramadan became compulsory, was Ashura, before this they used to fast and said, was it a compulsory fast or was it a mustahab fast even before Ramadan? So you have that discussion between ulama, those who all that before, that Ashura always been mustahab. That Ashura, fasting Yom Ashura, has always been mustahab. And that's called Jumhur of the ulama. That called Jumhur of the ulama regarding that matter. Then a call that before Ramadan it was fard, it was compulsory to fast Ashura. Then with the advent of Ramadan or the fast of Ramadan, then it became something. That was it was mansukh, or it became mustahab. That's the second view of the ulama on this matter. And of those who take this view, they have Ibn Hazm, Ash-Shawkani, and also Ibn Hajar, that of the view that Ashura initially was compulsory, then it was somewhat abrogated or moved to something which was then became something that then became mustahab upon the establishment of Ramadan. And the other view that mentioned that it was that has always been mustahab. It's always been mustahab and never been compulsory. But as aqwal between the ulama on that particular matter. The next of the fast that they mention after this as mustahab, they mention Yom Ithnain wa Khamis. So fasting these 2 days of the week, which is Monday, Ithnain being Monday, and Khamis being Thursday. So they mention that regarding concerning this matter, where the Prophet ﷺ you have hadith regarding fasting of those. They mentioned that the hadith so the Prophet kind of somewhat the hadith regarding fasting of those days, where the Prophet ﷺ mentioned regarding concern of the hadith, they mentioned ذاك اليوم يومان تعرض فيهما الأعمال, that these 2 days that our actions are somewhat that there's place before رب العالمين, before the Lord of the world, وحب and يورد أملي ونصاهم, that I love, I prefer for those days, those 2 days when the actions are presented to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that I'm fasting. So based upon this, that they mentioned that it shows regarding the Prophet ﷺ would fast these days based upon one of the reason being that actions are presented on those 2 days. And the hadith in Ahmed wa Abu Dawood and others. Overall ulama mentioned, they have a discussion regarding those hadith, but they mentioned that the hadith regarding fasting Monday, it is more sound than a hadith that includes both those two, regarding Thursday, the hadith regarding Monday, they are more sound compared to the one that mentioned about fasting on Thursday. But overall, of the ulama mentioned that they are authentic regarding fasting of those days. The next of those ones that they discuss regarding concerning of the fasting that they mentioned, so weekly fasting would be Mondays and Thursdays according to the person's ability. So either person does both days, or he does one of those days, but he can of those within the week of those 2 days are more encouraged for the person or recommended for a person to fast. The next of the fast that I mentioned, which is more related to Ramadan, is Siyam Sit Min Shawwal. So in relation to Ramadan, that is linked to Ramadan more so, is fasting 6 days of the month of Shawwal. So after Ramadan, we have the month of Shawwal. So the ulama, so the Prophet ﷺ mentions a hadith regarding fasting of those days. And again, the hadith of Abu Ayyub, the hadith of من حديث أبي أيوب الأنصاري رضي الله عنه قال رسول الله عليه السلام من صام رمضان ثم أتبعه ستا من شوال كان كصيام الدهر ورواه مسلم. So the hadith in that Sahih Muslim, where the Prophet ﷺ, he mentioned regarding the meaning of hadith, من صام رمضان, that the one who fasts Ramadan then follows up with 6 days of the month of Shawwal, which is the month right after Ramadan. He mentioned كان كصيام الدهر, as if the person have fasted the entire year, as if the person have fasted the entire year. So they mentioned this particular hadith that can somewhat encourage for one to fast after Ramadan 6 days, 6 additional days after Ramadan. So they mentioned that Jumhur of the ulama, they mentioned that Jumhur of the ulama, not all the ulama, but Jumhur of the ulama, that fasting these 6 days is mustahab. Jumhur of the ulama take the position fasting these 6 days. Regarding fasting these days, they mention it is mustahab. Amongst those, Imam Shafi, Ahmed, that is mustahab for one to fast these 6 days. Then you have the view of Imam Malik and also Abu Hanifa that take the position it is disliked. That Imam Malik and Imam Abu Hanifa, or Abu Hanifa alayhi rahmatullah ta'ala, that mention it is dislike to fast these days. And Imam Malik, his reason behind not that dislike fasting of these days, he mentioned that he did not see Al Medina fasting these days. So Imam Malik, that he did not saw the people of Medina during his time fasting this day. So it kind of somewhat he went where they said the action of Al Medina, Amal Al Medina. So he more took to the action of the people of Medina regarding fasting, that of not fasting this day, because even though he knew of the hadith which is mentioned in Muwatta, but he found that the people of Medina were not fasting these days, so he kind of somewhat saw it as something which is disliked and did not follow, adopted following of this practice. So he mentioned the reason behind, as he mentioned that the hadith for him was known, but he went more with the actions of the people of Medina, as within the Maliki Fiqh and the madhab of the Malik amongst the usul, that at times, in certain cases, they'll use concerning Amal al-Medina, that they use as a source for them, the action of the people of Medina. So in this case, that he took more the action of the people of Medina over the hadith, over the hadith. But you find that others, Ibn Abdul Barr, that Ibn Abdul Barr, that mentioned that, shall I give some form of excuse to Imam Malik. Ibn Abdul Barr, that can somewhat try to present some form of excuse for Imam Malik. We mentioned that he saw it as the hadith did not reach him. The hadith did not reach Imam Malik. That is why he did not go by the hadith. But it's not excuse that he tries to put forward for Imam Malik. So it's more that it is Ibn Abdul Bar, who's of the mujtahid of the Malikiyah, that all that is something to be done, but then try to present some form of excuse for Imam Malik. So overall, I mentioned that it is something which is thabit, the hadith in Sahih Muslim regarding fasting these days. So based upon this, it is something which is mustahab for the one who, after ending Ramadan, that they should fast these six additional days after Ramadan. The next of the discussion they discussed regarding that what is preferred regarding these 6 days of Shawwal, to do them consecutively, or for them to tafarruq, or to do them separate, which is more preferred. So you have a discussion now that should one do them together, or one should do them, or one do them separately. So you have that discussion between ulama regarding that, which way is better. The person can do so all together, then that's always encouraged. And if the person was to do them also separate within the month of Shawwal, then that is also still acceptable. That is still acceptable. So it's not a condition that, as ulama mentioned, that it has to be done consecutively is not a condition. It is not a condition. And that's the view that I mentioned, that the ulama, Shafi, the Shafi'iyah and the Hanabila, that's the position. And also others have given fatwa regarding of contemporary, that is not condition, have to be done all together, but to be done in that manner, then that's not a problem. Or to be for them to be done separately, also that's not a problem, as long as they're done within the month of Shawwal. They are done in the month of Shawwal. Another discussion that became of that arise from this matter is the matter they discussed, which is mentioned that the one who has fast to be made up. So the person who have qada for Ramadan, a person that did not complete all his fast of Ramadan. So he have days to be made up for Ramadan, which is preferred, or what is to be done in that case is the person to fast, make up is the days that are missed first, or is allowed for a person to fast these voluntary fasts before he completes his qada of Ramadan. So you have a discussion between the ulama on this. So you have that discussion between the ulama of those who order a person that he should make up his Ramadan first, and then after he does these voluntary siyam, these 6 days after completion of making up the days that were missed. So his qada of Ramadan should be done first. Then after he can do these voluntary siyam, amongst them these days of Shawwal. And that they mentioned that they mentioned that they said the same in the hadith here. Man sama Ramadan. So they mentioned the part that they said man sama Ramadan. They mentioned that man sama Ramadan thumma atba'ahu, that the one who fasts Ramadan. So they mentioned that to fast Ramadan, the person to be classed as fast Ramadan, it means whatever was to be made up by way of qada, it is also done. So the person have not fast Ramadan until he has make up what was missed during Ramadan. So they mentioned that, so based upon this, they mentioned the person should complete what remain of Ramadan, then after do these voluntary fasts that comes after, and also kind of somewhat prioritizing if we have that which is wajib and that which is fard, which is to be given precedent. I mentioned you will give precedent to that which is compulsory over that which is voluntary. Then the others who all concerned, the person can delay making of the person, they give some allowance. So the second view, that they give allowance, that the person can fast Shawwal, then after make up Ramadan, because they mentioned that the ayyam that a person have for Ramadan, it goes until next Ramadan. So the days to make up his qada is time, the time that he has to do so, that he has clemency, that he's able to do so from the end of Ramadan, the month of Shawwal, until next Ramadan. And also that Aisha radiallahu anha, that she would still make up until the end of and the last days of before Ramadan. So Aisha radiallahu anha, that she still be making up some of our fasts of the month of Ramadan, the pre-Ramadan, close to right before the start of the new Ramadan. So they mentioned that based upon those things that the person can delay those days of Ramadan after Shawwal. So he does Shawwal, then after he does the days of, then he does the Qada of Ramadan. He does the Qada of Ramadan. So as I mentioned that you have different buhuth or different research or thesis on this particular topic that even they mentioned that we have mentioned several have done the work on this, and of those and you have those two views. Overall, you have those two views regarding the person giving precedent to Ramadan, make up those days, then does Shawwal, or the person have more leniency where he can do Shawwal, then after that do Ramadan. So those views are there. So you find the likes of contemporary Shaykh bin Baz and also Ibn Uthaymeen that they are more in line regarding that the person does the compulsory days to be made up for Ramadan, then after he does Shawwal. So with them, that the person will do Qada of Ramadan, then after he will do Shawwal, but not to do the voluntary before the compulsory, not to do the voluntary before the compulsory. But Jumhur mentioned the person can do the voluntary before the compulsory, as he has more time to make up those to do his qada. So you have that discussion between the ulama, as we have stated. The next of the thing that they mentioned regarding voluntary fast, so Sawm Shaban, that they mentioned Shaban, or the more one that are more clear that they mentioned. So the ones of Shaban, they mentioned Shaban somewhat in general. Okay, so also Sawm Shahr al-Muharram. The next one we'll go back to more so regarding of those days concerning Siyam Thalatha Ayyam min kulli shahr. So of those ones that are more mentioned, fasting 3 days of the month. Fasting 3 days of the month. So on this topic, that you have on this topic regarding fasting 3 days of the month, that most you have various hadith regarding fasting 3 days in the month. Some hadith are general regarding fasting any 3 days of the month. So you have a hadith that mention general fasting any 3 days of the month. Then you have, and those hadith are more authentic. Then you have some hadith that mention specific days, those specific days being those 3 days, which is, they said Ayyamul Bid, which will be the 13th, 14th and the 15th of each month, the Islamic month that they mentioned. So on this we'll discuss, they mentioned that so the ones that are more general regarding fasting any 3 days of the month, they mentioned his mustahab with all the ulama. They mentioned his mustahab siyam thalatha ayyam min kulli shahr. And the evidence for this, the hadith of Abu Hurairah and the hadith of Abi Darda in the Sahih Muslim, where the Prophet ﷺ called Awsani Rasulullah ﷺ bi thalatha. So the Prophet mentioned that the Prophet ﷺ that he have recommended, advised me regarding 3 matters. Bi rakatay ad-duha. So those 3 advice, rakatay ad-duha, so praying 2 rakatayn for duha. Siyam thalatha ayyam min kulli shahr. The second, fasting 3 days of each month. And the third, and la anam hatta uthir, and that I do not go to sleep until I perform witr, So the shahid for us, the discussion regarding the second that he mentioned was siyam thalatha ayyam min kulli shahr, that fasting 3 days for the month. So from this hadith, which is general, they mentioned that this hadith, that it mentioned that he was advised, this narration in Bukhari and Muslim, that the Prophet advised him regarding these 3 things, and of these 3 things is fasting 3 days of each month, without specifying which of these 3 days. So generally fast any 3 days of the month and be consistent in doing this. Then another hadith that mentioned Sawm Shahr as-Sabr, where the Prophet, the hadith mentioned, the hadith of the Prophet mentioned as Sawm Shahr as-Sabr, that fasting the month of Sabr, which I mentioned Ramadan. Then I mentioned وصوم ثلاثة أيام من كل شهر صوم الدهر. Then the second part that he mentioned that fasting 3 days of each month is صوم الدهر. It's like fasting for the entire year. And I mentioned the hadith in Ahmed and others. And they mentioned that Sheikh al-Muqbil and others all hadith to be authentic. That mentioned Sheikh Muqbil and others all hadith to be authentic. And also those of made tahqiq of the book Musnad of Ahmed al-Naut. So they mentioned the hadith, the shahid from the hadith mentioned وصوم ثلاثة أيام من كل شهر صوم الدهر, that fasting 3 days for each month, every month, as if fasting for a year, fasting for a year. So they mentioned that hadith also, it mentioned about fasting 3 days without specifying which 3 days. So they mentioned those hadith are generally more regarding that topic, regarding fasting of 3 days. Then we have some specific hadith that mention about fasting ayyam al-bid, fasting ayyam al-bid, or these 3 days. But of those who have, there's a risala, 2 risala that have been written of recent that mention regarding concerning of some of the hadith of Abi Dhar or Abi Dhar Ghaffari that mention about fasting these 3 days being the 13th, the 14th and the 15th. They mention that all those hadith are daif. So you have 2 risala discuss the matter in depth that you can find them online. That one is about 200 page, that and the other about just maybe on the 100 page. But one, it is called, where you find these risala, these research that they mention, a hadith waridat fi siyam ayyam al-bid. I was to print it, but didn't have a chance to print it. And that is written by someone called, a doctor called Adil ibn Sad al-Matrafi. That one about just on the 100 page. But its conclusion, so I mentioned that the title, full title, a hadith waridat fi siyam ayyam al-bid. That a hadith that have been collected that mentions fasting the days, these white days, 13, 14, 15. Dirasa hadithiyya naqdiyya. So this like an approach that some have in their risala mentioned, dirasat hadithiyya, so collecting all those hadith, and also naqdiyya, and also discussing what have been mentioned regarding those hadith, regarding them being authentic or not. His final conclusion, the Sheikh Adil Matrafi, that he mentioned in conclusion that all the hadith that specify that these 3 days or the 13th ayyam will be that they refer to as, they're all weak. That they're all weak. And they are not all authentic, but some of the ulama who kind of somewhat that these so that they have mentioned now, them being put together, they give strength to each other. But some of those hadith, they are very weak. But generally is conclusion that they are said to be a hadith that are weak, regarding the hadith that specify that these 3 days, that there are these 3 days mentioned, the middle of the month. And also the second risala on this topic that I mentioned is called Rawda Bahij Bitahqiq Ahadith Ayyam al-Bid. So the author of this one, or the one of these that I mentioned, is Abul Hasan Ali ibn Jadullah. Someone, I guess, from Egypt who have done this one, the other, I think, from Mamlaka. But overall, wherever they're from, that these are the risala that discuss this matter in depth. So they have kind of somewhat gathered all a hadith that covers regard, that specify, discuss this topic in general regarding fasting 3 days in the month, the hadith that are general, that are more authentic, that doesn't specify a particular date, we decided to be doing a tahdid without specifying any particular date, and those hadiths that are somewhat more specific, that covers those days that are said to be ayyam al-bid, where I mentioned that those ahadith, they are said to be da'if, they are said to be da'if. So that's concerned that matter. So with that conclusion, also that was mentioned that because of that of those who come to the conclusion regarding that the 13th, the 14th, and the 15th, we mentioned that that most of the hadith that they're on the discussion, they're weak. Those who lean towards that, those hadith that even though they are said to be all criticized, but if they all compile or put together, they give strength to each other. So it can somewhat form a form of permissibility or allowance for a person to fast those days. According to the view that more in line with regarding those hadith, they give strength to each other, so they can be used. So that's concerned that matter, and to be looked into. But the ones that, for one thing for sure, the hadith, they're all weak. One thing for sure, the hadith are all weak. The question is, do they give strength to each other? Do they give strength to each other? Then that becomes the discussion, which goes back to certain principles regarding ilm al-hadith. So you have certain principles regarding when a hadith, a group of hadith that are said to be da'if, when they can give strength to each other, then that also becomes an issue where that at times that there are certain rules have to be followed. If the rules are not fully followed, then you might find a person might make authentic that which in reality is weak. So those rules are not followed regarding what are the principles and rules regarding when weak hadith can give strength to each other. If those rules are not applied, then a person can make that which is not authentic. So that's concerning that particular matter regarding what they mentioned regarding those days, regarding fasting days that are said to be. So as for the person regarding these, they mentioned now after, so that's concerning of those fasting are somewhat have some that we are encouraged to fast those days. They discussed regarding the matter regarding concerning that al-yajuz al-mutawwa and yaftar idha sha, a person who breaks his fast tatawwa. So it's a voluntary fast, but a person due to whatever reason decide to not continue that fast, he will decide to break that fast. What is upon him? The person was fasting Monday, voluntary fast, and for whatever reason decide that he's going to break the fast and not complete that day. Does he make up or not make up for that day? Question clear? No. Aywa. So on that matter, you have the ulama mentioned regarding concerning that. So the person, one is allowed to break his fast as a voluntary fast. So one is allowed, for whatever the reason may be, to break his voluntary fast. As I mentioned, so of those who, so he's allowed to break off his fast, and he does not make up. The one who's doing a voluntary fast, then he can break it, whatever the reason may be. And does he make up? No, he does not make up. And of those that mentioned up in the mention, it's not matter of Ahmed, Ishaq or Shafi, that regarding voluntary fast, that it's allowed for the person to break it as he wishes. And also they mentioned that of the Salaf from the Sahaba, they mentioned that's the view they're taken by Umar ibn Khattab, Ali ibn Abi Talib, Abi Darda, Ibn Umar ibn Abbas, that take the position as mentioned by those narration in Al-Muhalla by Ibn Hazm, that the person that is doing a voluntary fast, if he or she chooses to break it for whatever reason, then he's allowed to do so. And also, does he have to make up? No, he doesn't have to make up for that fact. It's a voluntary fast, it's not compulsory. Then the second opinion on this matter, that they mention أنه يلزمه الإتمام, that a person who starts out a voluntary fast, that is not allowed to break it, that he should complete it. So the fact that he has started the process of the fasting, then he is not left to his will to break it as he wishes, but rather he should complete it. He should complete the day, and that's the view taken by Abu Hanifa and also Malik. Abu Hanifa wa Malik. But Imam Malik, that he can somewhat have some restriction regarding that can. So Imam Malik and Imam Abu Hanifa can somewhat of the view in general, the person that he should not break his fast as he wishes, but the fact that he start his voluntary fast, then he should complete it. But a view that the first of the ulama regarding the person that it is allowed for him to break his fast and also not to make up, and also he does not have to make up, then that's the more correct view. That's the more correct view amongst the ulama. But they mention that Jumhur, still owe the person, if he breaks his fast, they still own constant that Jumhur, that it is still, even concerning that al-qadha, another day they mentioned that is still preferred. So they mention the person, it is still preferred that the person that did break it, it is not a must for him to make up, but it is mustahab for him to make up if he did break it. Abu Hanifa, all of you to the person, if he was to break his fast, a voluntary fast, then qadha is wajib. That qadha is wajib. So Abu Hanifa, that all concern a person, if he was to break his fast, whether he did it is voluntary fast, that sawakana, whether he did concerned with other or beghayr udhr, that a person must make it up. That's Abu Hanifa on this matter. Malik mentioned that it's a must for him to make up if he broke his voluntary fast. If he broke his voluntary fast, Imam Malik take the view that the person that qadha, to make it up, it is wajib if he did so without a valid reason. So if he broke his fast without a valid reason, then he has to make it up. He has to make it up. But as we mentioned, that qawl jumhur of the ulama mentioned that is not a must that he has to make it up, but they see it as mustahab for him to do so. That they mentioned that that's concerned the qawl of jumhur of the ulama, and that's the correct view, as there's no dalil regarding the person who broke his voluntary fast. That's a must for him to make up. So regarding concern that there's no evidence by way of Quran or Sunnah that the person was to break his voluntary fast, that he has to make up, there's no evidence for this. There's no evidence for this. So that's concerning of those masail that are discussed regarding aywa. I know. Assalamu alaikum. طيب. So I said after hadith, Bismillah wa salatu wa salam Rasulullah wa ba'd. So they mentioned regarding the hadith that mentioned regarding of these 3 days of Ayyam al-Bid. So you have hadith of Hafsa, Mu'mineen, that you mentioned, كان رسول عليه السلام يصوم 3 أيام من كل شهر. That you mentioned the Prophet عليه السلام that you will fast 3 days in each month. Ithnain, Khamis. That's the next hadith. They mentioned hadith of Aisha that the hadith of Abi Dhar, that's a different hadith. They mentioned hadith of Abi Dhar, where they mentioned the Prophet ﷺ قال كان من كان صائما, that the one who wished to fast, فليصم أيام بيد, that the one who wished to fast, then he should fast the days of Bid. Then they mentioned that وقيل هي ثالث العشر رابع العشر وخامس العشر. So they mentioned these hadith, or mentioned that most of those hadith that regarding specifying fasting Ayyam al-Bid, that those hadith are da'if, that they are weak. So you find some ulama all that fasting these particular days, it is not something that they that the person does so labas, but it's not something that to say that there's evidence to say you that it's more preferred to fast these particular days. So the person, if he does it, you still fall in the general fasting of 3 days, but to always specify these days, then there's no specific evidence or authentic evidence to say doing so is said to be from the Sunnah. Said to be from the Sunnah. And be in mind concerned that some of these masail mentioned that with some of these masail, as we said, some of the ulama may authenticate these hadith, And you might find that of the ulama of contemporary time that all these hadith to be authentic, but it wouldn't be, say, the person all concerns of fasting these days of Ayyamul Bid, that the all concern is not per se to say it's a sunnah. For a person, that person, as you understand, the person will say it is not of the sunnah to fast these days of Ayyamul Bid, then a person that there's no, you can't say the person is wrong in saying so. Even though, might mention, others may hold that it is the sunnah based upon their conclusion that the hadith are authentic, but those who the hadith is not authentic, then they have a right to say that it's not from the sunnah. But a person can fast any 3 days without specifying which 3 days, especially these days that are said to be Ayyamul Bid, the 13th, 14th and 15th. So that's concerning that those matters are discussed. They discuss after days. So that's concerning what are mentioned. Then after the author, you can somewhat go into matter regarding a matter regarding itikaf, matter regarding al-itikaf, which we'll discuss at another point, inshallah, another day. We'll discuss concerning al-itikaf, or close to the time of before the 10th. The next couple of weeks we can discuss concerning itikaf and the ahkam that relates to al-itikaf. So as I said, that's the conclusion of this book that gives us a general idea as to what is expected and what to be done in the month of Ramadan. He discussed also days that you should not fast, which is days that are known, Ayyamul al-Eid and the likes. But overall, as we mentioned, that the author, he mentions Man yajib and yasum, who are those people that must fast. Then he mentioned those, what are those requirements for a person to fast. Then he can somewhat discuss of those people who are exempt, shar'an, people who are exempt from fasting due to their circumstance. So either a child, the person who's majnoon, and other cases where people, the woman who's pregnant and the likes. So I mentioned people who are exempt, the person who's traveling, the one who's breastfeeding or pregnant. Then I mentioned that waqtul wujub, when it's compulsory, the person of fact, which is the month of Ramadan, how we decide when is Ramadan, how many witnesses we need to begin the month of Ramadan, or how many people that have sighted the hilal do require 1 or 2 people, and also the ending, how many people are required to end the month of Ramadan, and the ways to start Ramadan, which is either through sighting or by way of the person are completing of the month of Shaban of 30 days. Then after we fast, then he discussed matter regarding people of different regions, are they to follow others, as I said, have a universal sighting, or each region have their own separate sighting. They have that discussion. Then discuss shurut al-sawm, that includes concerning that an-niyah, and a rule that includes the method regards an-niyah, whether it's to be done one niyah, one intention for the entire Ramadan, or a person must have an intention for each day. And we mentioned the hadith regarding concerning each day niyah, then those hadith are also daif, even though some may take those hadith as to be authentic, but those hadith are under discussion. Also those things regarding imsak and mufattirat, what are those things that are said to be those things that nullify one fast. So you have the common things, the more well-known established, eating and drinking, and then intimacy and the likes, that nullifies one fast, or things to be avoided while fasting. Then also he discussed concerning things that one should try to adopt while fasting, or the thing that one should do regarding of those things regarding as-suhoor, taking the suhoor before fasting. Also he discussed matters regarding al-iftar as soon as possible. Then also he discussed of those things which said to be things that are mustahab to be done, and also things that one can avoid, or one should avoid. And he mentioned those things regarding that we should avoid while fasting. And then we discuss other things regarding other fast or qada, regarding a person that al-qada for Ramadan, or the person to make up for Ramadan if they have missed any days. So what are the process and what to be done? The case regarding al-jima, the person fall into intimacy, then is kafara in those cases, which is three things to be done: either freeing, emancipating a slave, or a person that he fasts 2 consecutive months, and also, or if the person unable, then he feed 60 poor people. Then that's concerned those aqwal. Then he mentioned of those things that is encouraged in the month of Ramadan, that the person try to be kind So try to be kind in Ramadan. Also try to maintain good family ties in Ramadan. Also to read the Quran a lot in Ramadan. So those things can somewhat encourage itikaf in Ramadan, and feeding of poor people to break their, or feeding of others to break their fast in Ramadan, of those things that he encourages. And also things mentioned that the person should avoid regarding al-ghiba wal namima, things of ash-shahwa, hijama, and the likes. If one is attacked, how to respond in the month of Ramadan. So he discussed all those things that we have mentioned, and also what we have covered today. So that inshallah will end this discussion regarding a preparation for Ramadan, as a way of preparing ourselves for Ramadan. Just going to somewhat to remind ourselves of what are the ahkam that are to be followed in the month of Ramadan. So that inshallah will end. Wabillahi ta'ala tawfiq. So this year we did a book in Shafi Fiqh. Next year we see what is the next material to be used. That will be covered next year. But this year we did something in Fiqh of Shafi, because some to have experience as to how different madhahib cover these masail, how different madhahib that they may cover these masail, as to what they put and all to be representing their particular